and the chance of a fresh start. And Steve Nayland, the voice of Thatcher, about the battle to inherit her mantle. All that and more, but first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news today. Here is Tamsin Roberts.
Alistair, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 12 o'clock. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Drivers hoping to travel through the port of Dover are facing a second day of severe delays. The port's chief executive is warning there could be a repeat of yesterday's 5 to 6 hour delays as they expect more travellers to pass through. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said the queues were unacceptable, blaming a lack of staffing by the French at the border. The port said it had increased the number of border control booths, but blamed French staffing levels, while a French politician claims the delays are a result of Brexit, as officials have to run more checks than before. But Dover MP Natalie Elphick says the backlog is down to the French side.
The French didn't turn up to work as they were expected to do in the numbers that were needed, and that resulted in that traffic gridlock in Dover and that traffic chaos that we saw right across Kent. So the French were responsible for the mess yesterday. I understand that they are now manning the passport controls properly at Dover, which is good news, but it will take some time yet to clear through that traffic backlog.
Rishi Sunak says he would put the UK on a crisis footing to tackle issues such as inflation if he becomes Prime Minister. Speaking in Grantham, the former Chancellor hit back at tax cuts announced by his rival Liz Truss, warning they could lead to further inflation. He also promised to tackle the NHS backlog, pledging to eliminate one-year waiting times by September 2024.
I'm the candidate in this contest who can say unequivocally the NHS will be safe in my hands. We face the worst NHS winter crisis in decades. Tackling the backlogs is the biggest public service emergency.
Meanwhile, Liz Truss is promising to review all EU laws, calling for a red tape bonfire of all legislation retained after Brexit if she becomes Prime Minister. The Tory leadership hopeful said she would implement a review by the end of next year and scrap rules which were deemed to hinder UK growth. She argues that the measures would encourage business investment, but critics warn it could lead to a weakening of workers' rights. The body of a man has been found in Essex this morning after a 21-year-old went missing on the hottest day in British history. Emergency services had been looking for a man who was last seen in the water on Tuesday, close to Clacton Pier. Police say formal identification of the body, which was found in Jaywick, has not yet taken place, but efforts are being made to contact the man's family. Ukraine says Russian missiles have hit infrastructure in the city of Odessa just a day after a landmark deal was struck between the two sides to unblock grain exports. The agreement, brokered by the United Nations and Turkey, had raised hopes that an international food crisis stemming from the Russian invasion could be stopped. It follows months of Russia blockading Ukraine's ports in the Black Sea, causing a global shortage. A pizza delivery driver in the United States has been praised after rescuing 5 people from a burning home. Nick Bostic was driving in Lafayette in Indiana when he saw a burning house. He managed to help 4 people leave the building before going back in to rescue a 6-year-old girl. After finding the child, the pair had to jump from a first-floor window. Incredibly, they only sustained minor injuries. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. It's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Tamsin, thank you very much indeed. There are quite a few wrestling matches going on in the Tory leadership contest. Down now to the final 2 that the membership in the country will soon have to choose between. There is a less than elegant fight over the mantle of Margaret Thatcher. It's not quite, I'm Spartacus, but there is an air of that going on. The other is, as we always said it would be, over taxation. Now, on tax, the truth is that Sunak is closer to Thatcher. I know, I was there when Thatcher was Prime Minister and Geoffrey Howe and Nigel Lawson were Chancellors. In wanting to curb inflation before cutting taxes, Sunak echoes the early years of Thatcher. Truss is out on a limb, feeling the cost of living crisis is so bad for people that she'd cut taxes right now, insisting that they wouldn't be inflationary and believing that the ensuing growth in the economy would sort things out in the medium to long term. Right or wrong? You sense it might just be what ordinary voters want too. Few economists, however, agree, which perhaps is why she also said, and I quote, "The economic orthodoxy at the Treasury for the last 2 decades has been wrong." There's warnings, too, from one of Truss's economic policy supporters that her plans could see interest rates go up to 7%. So, my friends, burn your economic textbooks and hope that she's right. The other undeniable truth is that in going for Sunak versus Truss, the Conservative Party itself has rejected the chance for a genuine rethink and fresh start, be it via Badenoch, Mordaunt or Tugendhat. Sunak and Truss both served Johnson from the start. One finally wielded the assassin's knife, the other, some would say, stayed a little too long. Either way, both are versions of continuity Johnson. So today we'll be looking at those fault lines through the eyes of Tory MPs, one of whom backed Tugendhat, the other backed Mordaunt. We'll talk to another local party boss, now even more important in the contest, a couple of seasoned observers, and we'll also have the view from an MP in Ukraine. We'll talk health, as data shows that more and more of you are going private, even without health insurance. And, as Civitas says, at £10,000 per household, the NHS is one of the costliest and least efficient in terms of outcomes. We'll also be talking horses with the mistress of Hickstead, home of British show jumping, my friend Daisy Bunn. And we'll hear from Steve Nallen, or Nallen, depending on how you say it. I've just been told off in my ear, Nallen, the voice of Mrs. Thatcher, of course, in Spitting Image, on what it's like to impersonate the great lady. I do hope that Rishi and Liz are listening. Steve also has a new book out on a chap who has a magic power to change history and avoid disasters. I think there's a political theme there as well. And as always, I want to hear your thoughts on these matters and any others that are troubling or exercising you. Email gbviews@GBNews UK, tweet me or tweet at GBNews, or you can go on Facebook. Now, to get this conversation going, I'm delighted to be joined here in the GB News studio this Saturday afternoon by Joanne Nadler, who is political commentator and author of Too Nice to be a Tory. And joining us down the line is the associate editor of the Sun newspaper, Trevor Kavanagh. Let me start with Joanne here in the studio, if I may. So, as I said in the intro, down to the last two, but a conscious decision by Tory MPs not to give the membership in the country the choice of an outsider. Right or wrong?
Very disappointing, I think. I think I said last time I was in the studio a couple of weeks ago that I was supporting Kemi Badenoch, and I would love to have seen her in the final two, because I do think that she would have brought to this contest more of a radical rethink about what conservatism really is at this point, and what it should be, and what the party should really be taking forward now that it's coming through those kind of vicious infighting over the whole Brexit period. I feel as though Boris Johnson was both selected and elected as the Prime Minister who was going to bring Brexit through, and then he was left with this sort of policy vacuum. What was he going to do with it? And I'm really not clear from any of the candidates yet that they have grasped that. Let me bring
Trevor in at that point then, because, Trevor, you and I both covered those periods where Margaret Thatcher did an absolutely profound and fundamental rethink and then gave her party over a decade in power. And to be fair, after the Clause 4 moment, Tony Blair did the same with the Labour Party, a fundamental rethink, and that resulted in 10 years. Have the Tory MPs missed a trick here?
Well, I think that the point about Margaret Thatcher is that she was both a tax raiser and a tax cutter, and she didn't do one until it was safe to do. She didn't do the second until it was safe to do so. And this is the problem with the tax promises, I think, of both of the two final candidates. One is adamantly against tax cuts, and the other one is enthusiastically for them. And the trouble is there are good tax cuts and bad tax cuts. You want a tax cut which is going to boost the economy, and you don't want to just hand money out in an inflationary way, as I think Liz Truss's will do.
Interestingly, Trevor, in the Mail today, they've done a 2-page spread on what a whole range of economists think about it, and that's precisely the point that my GB News friend Liam Halligan makes, is that tax cuts generally may have that effect, but if you choose the right ones, the cost of living ones, it could have an impact. But let me just get confirmation from you, if I may, or contradiction. As I said in that introduction, if you look at the genuine history of what Margaret Thatcher, their great heroine, did, she didn't cut taxes until she'd controlled inflation. Those big tax cuts didn't come until the mid to late 80s.
That's exactly right. And of course, she had some very heavyweight cabinet colleagues alongside her in those early days. Geoffrey Howe, to his credit, was a very strong chancellor, and then he was followed by Nigel Lawson. That's an incredible combination of talent and expertise working at the centre, and I don't think we're matching that today. Rishi Sunak is a technocrat and I think a very, very bright man indeed, and I think his heart is in the right place. But I don't think that he is anything but a Treasury cipher on this, and I do worry about that because, as Boris said, the Treasury isn't always right, and on the big ones has frequently got it badly wrong. As for Liz Truss, I think that what she's doing is trying to compensate for those national insurance increases. But that money has already been taken, and the government is dishing out compensatory sort of payments in universal benefits and other things. You're just piling a lot of money out into taxpayers' pockets, which will lead to inflation. I think they're both wrong. They should be cutting corporation tax, which is obviously unpopular with the sort of Labour Party side or the left, but would help to get the economy up and running and beginning to deliver the fruits of prosperity that will lead to tax cuts in the future.
Joanne, you sat at the pounding heart of government in a number 10 function and therefore would know intimately how the Treasury works. Liz was number 2 in the Treasury, Chief Secretary, whereas Rishi, as Trevor was just reminding us, was obviously Chancellor of the Exchequer. In your objective view, and as a Tory, is Liz onto something where she says, I reject the economic orthodoxy, which Trevor just did as well, or bluntly speaking, is that vote-seeking naivety?
No, I do think she's onto something with this. I think the most interesting thing about her agenda, actually, is that she's talking about reviewing the mandate for the Bank of England. And it seems to me that in both of these candidates wrapping themselves in the colours of Margaret Thatcher, which they're obviously trying to do during this early stage of the campaign because they have to appeal to the party members. I mean, beyond the party members, I'm not sure that that's necessarily a selling point. But Margaret Thatcher was a monetarist, and we have dispatched monetary policy to the Bank of England. And that's, I think, what she's getting at with this idea about challenging the orthodoxy. Yeah. It's essentially saying we need to take back some control, to use that phrase again. Politicians need to take back some control of the economic cycle. And that seems to me to be particularly important given where we are with inflation.
Well, the word mandate that you used a moment ago, I mean, that's the government's sole instruction to the Bank of England, which is you must keep inflation at or about 2%. It's 5 times that. And secondly, you control the money supply. And as all of the textbooks basically say, if you let the money supply rip, that, sure as sure, is inflationary. I mean, that little plan that was hatched by Ed Balls and Gordon Brown is almost unworkable. Well, you can't have both.
As long as you have quantitative easing, you're not controlling the money supply. And I think that's largely been what's fired up inflation. And if Liz Truss or indeed Rishi Sunak want to review that, I think that's all for the better.
Trevor, what's your thought on that, on the mandate? Again, as I just reminding folk who are kind enough to listen to our conversations, so the Ed Balls and Gordon Brown set the Bank of England free, a great hurrah when that first Blair government was formed. And many people then said it was a great idea. There has since been a really lively debate that the mandate for the Bank of England should be as much about growing the economy, creating wealth, creating employment, as controlling inflation, upon which they patently have failed.
Well, I think you're right. And I think that the Bank of England doesn't have total freedom. It is governed by the rules set by the Treasury, and the Treasury can change that mandate to make the Bank of England start bringing inflation down to a different level than 2%, which will be chosen by the Chancellor of the day. I think what Liam Halligan has been saying for years now is that the Bank of England has been running amok with monetary easing, quantitative easing, which we are paying a heavy price for today. It's taken the easy path. It should have started to raise interest rates sooner, if only by a tiny fraction, but just to signal that this was not affordable. Now it's running out of control, and it's going to be very, very hard to bring it back. So there are some hard decisions to be made here. And I'm not sure that in many ways that what we've seen from Rishi Sunak indicates that that's what he is intending to do.
Yeah. And Patrick Minford is reported in the papers today, who was one of the few economists initially who came out and said, no, Liz is absolutely right, Liz is correct. He's saying, kind of, so long as you're prepared to accept interest rates going up to 7%, as you implied there, has to be done if inflation's to be controlled.
Absolutely right. And Patrick Minford, although he's now seen as a comparatively lone voice, is one of the finest economists of his age. And I would take a great deal of notice of him. But I do worry about the actual tax cuts that Liz Truss is considering. They are inflationary if they go straight into the pockets of people who will go out and spend on top of the other money that's been brought in through the universal benefits and so on. So there's no doubt that there's a question mark over those. The only problem is that the alternative ones, which are really good for the economy, would not immediately give the Tories a chance of winning the next election.
Yeah. A couple of things I want to end on, and I'm going to turn back to Joanne with me here in the studio, but then come back to you, Trevor. The first of those two things is this issue of disloyalty and Rishi being seen within the party in the country as the assassin, and Truss hanging on there perhaps too long, but now saying all sorts of ghastly things. The Telegraph's been running a campaign to have a Boris Johnson write-in vote on the ballot. How important, in your experienced view, is that notion of loyalty?
That's a fascinating question. I mean, I think the word is used as a way to sort of parlay support. It has currency if you say that you're loyal. But quite frankly, I think people are a little bit more grown up than that. I think they realise that politics is a pretty cutthroat business. You could argue, it seems to me, both ways. You could argue that Rishi Sunak had been loyal to Boris Johnson for quite a long time, given that it was well known that they disagreed on fairly fundamental issues of
Andrew Pearce in the Mail says the plot was going on for ages, way back when.
I mean, frankly, I'm not terribly interested in who did what and who said what when. I think all this plotting, people are fascinated by it within Westminster, but there's a kind of so what factor to it. We're trying to select the person who's going to be the next Prime Minister now. And I think we need to turn our attentions to what it is they're planning to do for the country. How they got to those final two, I think, it will be the stuff of mythology within the Conservative Party, but I think it's less pertinent and important at the moment.
What do you reckon, Trevor? The notion of loyalty, a passing phase, the party now moves on, or does it matter?
No, I think Joanne's absolutely right here. I think that we must now focus on who's going to lead the country from now on. And we have to choose between just two candidates, unfortunately. And I agree with Joanne again on her opening remarks. It is a great shame that candidates like Kemi Badenoch were not in that final grouping. What we need to do is to hear more from the two of them on various subjects, not least, of course, tax, but also education and environment and so on and so on. And for those who want to hear more, I think that you would like me to mention, of course, your rival station Talk TV, which will be taking questions from Sun readers to both candidates on Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock. And I think the Sun readership is certainly the contingent that both candidates are searching for as supporters in all of this.
Yeah, I have a very open mind and open heart, as you well know, Mr. Kavanagh. And I mention, in addition to your mentioning there, that there's another debate coming up on Sky, and there's also one coming up on the BBC. And of course, they're out and about in the country, the two of them, with Conservative Party organised debates. My final question, then, we've done loyalty, parked it there, reflecting on both of your very, very interesting answers. Trevor first. You remain one of the great journalists with your finger very firmly upon the pulse. What's your reading of the mood within the Conservative Party in the country? who they're likely to go for, who you think is going to be the likely victor when all of those debates are run and it comes to the run-up to that moment in September?
Well, barring a last-minute mistake of very considerable proportions, I think Liz Truss is the one to beat or one to lose the race. I don't think there's really much chance of Rishi being able to overcome those questions that have been raised in the last few minutes in this discussion, which is primarily, although we're looking ahead at the future, a lot of the candidates will be thinking about how he behaved in cabinet. And there is a question mark about his absences during periods when Boris desperately needed someone at his side, shouting on his behalf, as indeed Liz Truss did. People will notice that and remember that. And it was, after all, Rishi whose resignation triggered the vote of confidence in the long run, which brought Boris down.
What's your reading of your... sorry, something going on in my ear. What's your reading of that mood in the country? The point that was being mentioned in my ear was that I did say in the top lead-in that Rishi does have this mantle of assassin, the backstabber, around his neck. So just park that, because you've already commented upon that. But how you read, as a member of the party, the mood in the country and who ultimately they will go for?
I should just say I am currently a member of the party, but I go through long phases where I choose not to be a member of the party, so that I can be.
Are we in a fluid moment?
Yeah, but currently I am, which does mean that I will have a vote. And talking to friends of mine in the party, I think there is genuine. People feel really, really irritated that we're in this situation again. I don't accept that it's necessarily because they have a reflexive desire to keep Boris Johnson in post. I mean, I'm sure that applies to some people. But I think there is a kind of, how did we end up in this situation again? Are these final two really the best that we could have come up with? And that's not to say they don't have strengths, but neither of them is the sort of complete.
Do you share Trevor's final assessment that it's already become Liz Truss's to lose?
Oh, I think it absolutely is Liz Truss's to lose. But I also think that Rishi Sunak is a very adept and clever debater, and he could make up some of the difference. But I think it's going to be very tough for him.
I've asked you to come back at 1 o'clock when we'll be hearing from Justin Tomlinson as well, one of the Tory MPs, who actually shares your view. He would have liked a wider, more profound alternative debate as well. But for the time being, thank you very much indeed. And to you, Trevor, it's always a pleasure to see you and to share reflections and predictions with you as well. Thanks for breaking into your Saturday afternoon to be with us, and the very best to you, sir. See you soon, I hope. Trevor Kavanagh there, the Associate Editor of the Sun newspaper, and here in the studio with me, Joanne Nadler, political commentator, and she'll be back at 1 o'clock. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, and we've lots more coming up on today's programme. There's no doubt that the cost of living crisis will be a key issue in this contest in which the Tories, and the Tories alone, will choose our next Prime Minister. Well, more and more of us are getting into serious debt. Our South West of England reporter will be discussing exactly that subject next. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Head to this afternoon, and the UK is looking rather cloudy with outbreaks of rain across the north and the west. Let's take a look at the details. Northern parts of Scotland will be mostly dry this afternoon with some bright or sunny spells. Temperatures reaching around 19 degrees, turning increasingly cloudy though with rain arriving later. Northern Ireland will see rather cloudy conditions with patchy rain, though this shouldn't be too heavy, feeling humid with temperatures of 22 degrees but turning breezy. Mostly cloudy this afternoon across northern England with some patchy light rain in places, turning increasingly breezy, especially towards the coast. Top temperature 21 degrees. Rather cloudy skies across North Wales throughout the afternoon with the risk of some rain passing through. A gusty southerly wind will also develop. Temperatures will hover around 19 or 20 Celsius. There'll be some sunny spells from time to time across the East Midlands this afternoon, though perhaps the odd light shower is possible. Feeling pleasant in the sunshine, highs of 26 Celsius. Dry and bright across East Anglia this afternoon with plenty of sunny spells. Feeling pleasant in the sunshine. Temperatures reaching 25 Celsius, but it will be cooler towards the coast. Mostly dry this afternoon across southern England, with some bright or sunny spells developing from time to time. Further outbreaks of rain in the north and west this evening, drier weather holding on in the east. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello, welcome back. It's 28 minutes past 12 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. As if anybody needs telling, inflation in the UK has risen to 9.4%, with the cost of fuel, energy generally, and food rising at their fastest rates in 40 years. Now, the knock-on effect of those rises is literally eye-watering. Relative pay is falling at its fastest rate since 2001, 2 decades ago. And more of us are getting into serious debt that we have little or no chance of clearing. Our South West of England reporter Jeff Moody has been looking at the problem and exploring the ways that people can get themselves out of debt or help with coping it.
The statisticians call it money distress. We call it debt. And the statistics are coming at us fast. 9 million more of us have borrowed since the pandemic, a figure that's rising daily. The average Brit is paying £857 a year on interest payments alone. It will take us 25 years and 5 months to pay off our debt, and that's if we keep up with the payments. One person is declared bankrupt every 4 minutes and 13 seconds. Our finances are bleak, but they don't have to be. Expert Martin James says he has the answer, and it involves wine.
The most important thing to do is to sit down and actually work out what those finances are. Have a glass of wine if you want, maybe just the one, just until you've done it, or have one on standby as a reward when you've finished, or make yourself a cup of tea. Just try to make it as relaxing as possible.
And work out exactly what you owe and to whom. Sobering, perhaps. Necessary, certainly. But then what? Step Change is a charity that last year helped nearly 25,000 people become debt-free. Their first job, to take away the stigma and put you at your ease.
Our overwhelming message is always that people shouldn't suffer in silence. A lot of the time, people are too embarrassed to talk about their money problems. They're worried that there's no help out there, that they might be a hopeless case. And that's never the case at all.
Everyone can become debt-free, says the organisation. But how? Step 1, talk. Tell your creditors what's happening, whether it be a credit card, an energy supplier or a phone company. You'll get a sympathetic hearing. Step 2, contact Step Change.
They will then negotiate with your creditors, the people that you owe the money to get significantly reduced payments. I mean, it can go down to like £2 a month.
Step Change says bringing your debts into sharper focus is the first step in regaining control. They can offer all sorts of support and advice, and most importantly, a listening ear. Plus, the organisation has the heft to be able to champion for a change in the law on behalf of consumers.
Which is why we spend a lot of time as an organisation advocating for public policy changes so that the benefit system, for example, means that people aren't living in destitution and absolute poverty, and it means that they can make ends meet.
Making ends meet might not sound the most aspirational of goals, but for millions of us in these current climes, making ends meet is the biggest goal of all. Jeff Moody, GB News.
What a brilliant, calm and considered offering on that. Now, none of us here, whether it's Jeff, me or Liam Halligan, are pretending that there is an answer other, ultimately, than earning more than you have to pay out. It's the Mr. Micawber lesson from Charles Dickens, which is well worth looking up. But the two standout points there, Jeff, were to know exactly where you are and not panic and pull your hair out without doing the sums. And then, for God's sake, put your hand up and talk to someone who knows what you're entitled to do and what help there really is out there.
Yes, absolutely. And another piece of advice that I didn't have time to include in that report, but I think is very well worth mentioning now, is whatever you do, don't Google. If you start Googling debt management, ways out of debt, I owe money, etc., you're going to end up looking at all sorts of sites that really is best to avoid. Don't start going down the loan shark route or anything like that. Step Change is the place you need to go to. The website is stepchange.org. Alistair, I can talk from personal experience on this because it's something that I did. About 15 or 16 years ago, I rather foolishly decided to give up television, and I bought a farm in Kent and turned it into a hotel and a restaurant and a wedding venue. And it did very well for quite some time until the credit crunch in 2008 and that deep recession that followed. And to cut a long story short, the business went bust. I found myself with no job, with no home, with no salary, with no money. And I very foolishly put a lot of money onto credit cards. It was something getting on for £100,000 on credit cards. So that initial step, I will never forget the day that I phoned Step Change. And it's a bit like that moment when you say, hello, my name is Jeff Moody, I'm an alcoholic. It's that admission that there's something going on is a huge weight off your mind. And just having Step Change saying to me, you know what, we can fix this, we have your back, is extremely important and extremely emotional too. How did they have my back? How did they fix it? Well, the first thing they do, as I said in the report, is they get you to write down everything you owe. And this is very difficult these days because it's not as simple as looking at your direct debits and your standing orders, because we pay for things on phones and on PayPal, on all sorts of internet sites. So it's quite a process that they help you through. Once they've done that, they then give you a report. And you can negotiate with your creditors. You can either say, look, I want to reduce those monthly payments to £1 or £2 a month, or you can also reduce the whole amount. So say, for instance, you owe £10,000 on a credit card. You can say to these companies, I will never be able to pay that. I will be able to pay £5 grand, £4 grand, £3 grand. And very often they'll accept that. They accepted it for me. Here I am debt-free.
Well, I'm glad you're debt-free. I'm also glad that you're back on telly, and I'm sorry that the hotel didn't work out in the long run, but it's great to hear sage advice and great journalism from you, Jeff, and thank you very much indeed. Jeff Moody there with not only advice and guidance from Step Change, but always underlines it really sharply when someone's been there and done it. And don't forget what we said right at the top of the programme, those interest rates may be heading a lot higher than they are right now. So do, for goodness sakes, if you're in trouble, reach out to someone who knows what they're talking about. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. Plenty more still to come this afternoon, including the war in Ukraine continuing, but becoming something like absent from our news agenda in the UK. We'll be discussing that next, including grain deals, an update on the ground, and what the MPs there think of the UK prime ministerial race. But first, let's bring you up to date with all of the news. Here's Tamsin Roberts.
Alistair, thank you. It's 12:36. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Drivers hoping to travel through the Port of Dover are facing a second day of severe delays. The port's chief executive is warning there could be a repeat of yesterday's 5 to 6 hour delays as they expect more travellers to pass through. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said the queues were unacceptable, blaming a lack of staffing by the French at the border. A French politician claims the delays are a result of Brexit, as officials have to run more checks than before. Rishi Sunak says he will put the UK on a crisis footing to tackle issues such as inflation if he becomes Prime Minister. Speaking in Grantham, the former Chancellor hit back at tax cuts announced by his rival Liz Truss, warning they could lead to further inflation. He also promised to tackle the NHS backlog, pledging to eliminate one-year waiting times by September 2024. Meanwhile, Liz Truss is promising to review all EU laws, calling for a red tape bonfire of all legislation retained after Brexit if she becomes Prime Minister. The Tory leadership hopeful said she would implement a review by the end of next year and scrap rules which were deemed to hinder UK growth. She argues that the measures would encourage business investment, but critics warn it could lead to a weakening of workers' rights. The body of a man has been found in Essex this morning after a 21-year-old went missing on the hottest day in British history. Emergency services have been looking for a man who was last seen in the water on Tuesday, close to Clacton Pier. Police say formal identification of the body, which was found in Jaywick, has not yet taken place, but efforts are being made to contact the man's family. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Back to Alastair Stewart and Friends in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. It's 20 to 1. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends on GB News. The turmoil in domestic UK politics has pushed the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the ensuing war down the news agenda. That has annoyed a lot of you. So we've decided, come what may, that we will find time to bring you up to speed as Russia and Ukraine have signed a deal that allows the export of grain to resume through the Black Sea ports. We'll also be reflecting on how Ukraine might just be thinking about the coup against Boris Johnson, undoubtedly their favourite politician outside of Ukraine, and what they hope from whomsoever it is that takes over. Joining me now is Andrei Ossadchuk, who is a Ukrainian MP from the Golosh Party and has graced this programme before. And it is great to see you, Andrei, once again. There is some suggestion here when the war is discussed in the newspapers and on the news that the war is just turning a little your way at the moment. Russia under more pressure than ever, you regrouping, brokering the deal with Turkey to get your grain back on the market, which is cash for you, food for us. Are you feeling just a little more optimistic than when we last spoke?
I'm optimistic that Ukraine already has won this war. The only open question is the price, how much we will pay for this war. Definitely, we expect that the interest for Ukrainian war will went down because it's traditional approach in the West. People who lived during decades and several generations in comfort, they consider this war as some kind of TV show, and it's difficult for them to understand that serious. So that's why it's dramatically important for leaders to explain to their voters that now it's not Ukraine in war with Russia. It's entire West with Russia, which is in fact represents the evil. You was mentioning the grain deal. It's very important for today because the deal, in fact, did not survive even 24 hours. Just 3 hours ago, Russia hit Odessa, which is the city in the south of Ukraine, the largest seaport in the Black Sea. They attacked Odessa seaport with the cruise missiles, at least 2 missiles blown up on the territory of the seaport, which is very, very visible argument and evidence that it is impossible to have any deals with Russia. Yes, we expect to export our grain to the world market, mostly to receive some cash for this. I would remind that Ukraine has the grain on almost $10 billion from the previous season, and definitely it will influence the prices for the grain in the global market. But you see that Vladimir Putin and all his FSB team, they continue to blackmail everyone, and they continue to destroy all agreements. In fact, he spat into the face of United Nations and his so-called friend Erdogan by attacking Odessa today. Meaning that, as we're repeating during months, that Putin and Russia, they understand just power, just military power. So conclusion is simple. No more agreements is possible with modern Russia. They're much weaker than someone may think. More weapons to Ukraine will help us to finish this war, hopefully this year.
Okay. Talking of which, let me pick you up on that final point about there will only be continued success, as you see it, with a victory, and that means supplies. Do you sense that the United Kingdom has taken its eyes slightly off the ball at a government level in terms of giving you the ammunition, the weaponry that you want and the training? Or has the Defence Secretary, who I know you have met and talked to, Ben Wallace, not a candidate in that leadership race, kept the light burning?
First of all, the role of United Kingdom was huge in uniting the West against Russian invasion to Ukraine. So we very, very much appreciate everything what has been done till today. And we very much expect that despite of internal political fights in the United Kingdom, this position will continue in the further months and probably years. Yes, we received a lot from United Kingdom. Yes, the idea of providing training to Ukrainian soldiers is extremely important because we receive huge amount of different types of modern military equipment, which is good, which is excellent, but definitely our soldiers need the training for that. So ongoing trainings brings a lot of value and a lot of benefit for Ukrainian army. And the last comment due to that, first, in fact, 3 weeks of using of advanced European weapons clearly show that Russia is far, far behind the level of technology which exists in the West.
Sure.
Confirming again that they're much, much weaker than one may think.
All right, one final quick question, if I may, Andre. My previous guests here, looking at it all from a UK political point of view, both felt so far that they think Liz Truss, who you've also met in her role as Foreign Secretary, is the one who is most likely to be the next Prime Minister. Short and sharp answer, Andre. Are you comfortable with that?
We believe that Liz Truss is a good candidate for Ukraine, but the bottom line, we will appreciate any leadership in the United Kingdom. It's your issue, it's your internal issue, and we respect your democracy. And we expect that despite the decision of Conservative Party, the Russian policy, the Ukrainian policy will stay the same or even tougher, because everyone understands that duration of this war directly linked to the readiness of the West and United Kingdom to act. We believe that you will continue to do as you did previously. Thank you for that.
Thank you, sir. Andrei Ossadchuk, it's always a pleasure, an honour to talk to you. And you take care, and all of your friends and colleagues and family as well. And I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you very much indeed, and have a good weekend. Extraordinary man, very optimistic against all of the odds, and giving a very clear lesson to all of us what they need to stand their ground in the fight for freedom. Andrei's a Ukrainian MP from the Golosh Party. Joining me now, and I hope able to listen to that, is Con Hochland, the defence editor and the chief columnist at The Telegraph, another old friend and a regular on this programme, I'm delighted to say. Did you hear what Andrei was saying?
Yes, Alistair, I listened to it very closely.
Extraordinary man, but so let's take it. It's a breaking news story, as it were, and you're one of the best to analyse it. His anger and bitterness about the naivety of the United Nations, and to a degree Turkey, in brokering that grain deal, which both sides desperately wanted, blown out of the water within hours by Russia.
Well, I've been very sceptical about this deal from the outset, Alistair. Only this week, on Tuesday, Putin was in Tehran for meetings with the Ayatollahs to help Russia evade sanctions. But on the fringes of that meeting, he also had a session with the Turkish president, Erdogan. Ostensibly, it was about Syria, but of course, Turkey is supporting Ukraine in this conflict. And at that meeting on Tuesday in Tehran, the atmospherics between Putin and Erdogan were very bad. If you remember, and I'm sure you watched it closely, Erdogan kept Putin waiting for the press conference, a deliberate diplomatic slight. So first of all, we've got bad relations between Russia and Turkey. We have bad relations, obviously, between Russia and Ukraine. So when this deal was announced, I thought, really? And also, look at the fine print. Are we doing any deals with Russia, which would, to my mind, would be unacceptable? Anyway, as Andrei said, the deal didn't pass go, because the Russians fired 2 Caliber missiles at Odessa overnight, suggesting that the prospect of shipping any grain out of Ukraine is pretty minimal. And I would further say, Alistair, that the reason the Russians are involved in these talks is just to draw attention to themselves. And what they want is for the West to lift all sanctions against Russia, and then they let the grain out, which is, there's a word for it, it's called blackmail.
Yeah. Whilst they're also stealing steel, I gather, as well there.
And people.
Yeah, absolutely. But talking of deals, I think last time we were on, we were talking about Macron and to a lesser extent, the German Chancellor inching towards, let's try and sit round the table and let's try and cut a deal. This blows that out of the water completely as well, doesn't it? No one is going to seriously negotiate with Putin now over an end to this conflict and a future for Ukraine.
That's quite true. But I still think that people like Scholz and Macron would like to do a deal. Look at the dire predicament that Germany's put itself in, where they're now talking about energy rationing because they don't, they're so reliant on Russian energy. And the French, of course, always want to go their own way. Macron has, in my view, humiliated himself with his discussions with Putin over the last few months. But I think the embers of appeasement are still burning, both in Berlin and Paris, and we need to watch this. And as I said, when this deal was first announced, the first thing I was looking for was signs that we were capitulating to Moscow and giving them an easy ride on some of the sanctions. I haven't seen the fine print, but as I said, the deal now seems to be dead in the waters of the Black Sea.
Yeah. The final question I wanted to ask you, whether or not I'd had the honour to talk to Andrei, but it now underlines the question I wanted to put to you anyway, given his comments. Is he naive to be optimistic about a Liz Truss premiership? You know her very, very well, having written at length about her with your diplomatic correspondent hat on, as well as your columnist. And your newspaper today does a 2-page spread interview with her, and the headline of it is, "I am the change candidate." Is Andrei right to be optimistic, or are you cautious?
No, I think my own hunch is that Liz Truss will be a better candidate in terms of the Ukraine issue. I know she's been working very hard on this grain issue with her team at the Foreign Office, and that they regard easing the grain shortage as a global problem and one that Britain must help to lead. So that's the kind of leadership we want. Rishi Sunak has resisted efforts by Ben Wallace to improve the defence budget. He doesn't seem that interested in national security. He seems very interested in Rishi Sunak, and so you can tell where my loyalties lie at the moment.
Well, I would never accuse you of being loyal, but I would always accuse you and welcome your candour and analysis. But I do know where you're standing. Let me put it that way, Con. Thank you for your time this afternoon, sir, and you stay in touch. You're always welcome on the programme. That's Con Cochran there, the Defence Editor-in-Chief columnist at The Telegraph. Now, a week tomorrow, Hickstead, the home of British show jumping, will host the UK's Nations Cup. It's always a grand event, and I'm thrilled to say that my next guest has invited me and my wife to join her. Now, I want to make one thing crystal clear. This is not an elite thing. Whatever folk tell you, you are as likely to bump into Christopher Biggins as you are to bump into Sir Nicholas Soames. It's simply equestrian sport, and those who love it at its very best. And joining me now is Daisy Bunn, director of Hickstead, and there she is, grinning as you always do, my dear. What else? Help folk through this, because you and I are total show jumping equestrianism junkies. What are some equivalents in the world of sport for other activities when you think in terms of the Nations Cup? I mean, it's not a World Cup, but not a European one. I mean, it is global. How do you compare and contrast it when you're trying to explain it to folk?
I mean, I think a really good way to explain it is it's the only chance that the British public get to watch Team GB compete on home soil. So it's a 5-star Nations Cup. It's the very top league, and where we'd have the Olympics, the World Championships, the Europeans every 4 years on that level. This Nations Cup series happens every year at venues across the world. So we're the only one in the UK. And it's very exciting. And of course, we've had a 2-year break, so it's even more exciting, and we cannot wait for it to begin.
Yeah, and some of the real big names of the sport have underlined their global reach by being part of the Nations Cup team. But there's also a challenge to the sport that we love a great deal, and that's the Global Champions Tour, that has seen a lot of riders and horse combinations operate more abroad, because that's where the big money is, rather than at home. Do you see that as something of a challenge?
We don't actually. We just see it's a win-win for everyone. So the Global Champions Tour, as you said, has been a great introduction. It's been going in the sport for longer than we think, Alistair, because we're getting so old, but I think 10 to 15 years certainly, maybe even a bit longer, even though I think it's new. And the great thing there as well is these team competitions, but with riders from different nations. Yes. So that has never happened before. And that makes it a little bit more akin to, say, Formula One or something. And of course, those competitions also have a different format. So they're all in city centres. There's a fabulous one on Miami Beach. There's one under the Eiffel Tower. They have these incredible city centre locations, and they're really geared as well towards corporate involvement, as you well know. Yeah. And we are very excited to still have at Hickstead, I wouldn't be the first person to say that Hickstead is akin, to pre-event tiredness, to say Wimbledon for horses. And we're so lucky that it's still such a special win for people. And of course, on the Sunday, we have the Grand Prix of Great Britain, which is the Longines King George V Gold Cup. So we really do have the creme de la creme of world sport. And of course, this year, the FEI World Championships, as you know, are in Denmark in August. So next week will be the last run for most of the riders. So it'd be a great way to see current form. And we do have many of the Team GB actually jumping here next week, including, of course, Ben Mayer, reigning Olympic champion.
Absolutely. And I've watched him compete at Hickstead, and my hero, as you know, Scott Brash, compete there. But also there's a generation of youngsters coming through, people like Peter's son, Harry Charles, still in their early 20s, who are going to be shaking gold come one day. My final point is this, and you and I...
What's so exciting?
Yeah, totally. That you and I have chortled about many a time. Tell me the story of the famous Derby Bank at Hickstead. It is a completely standout item. You've got to come steep up, climb to the top, pause for a while, and then scurry down and not slide, and then go straight over a jump. But it's higher than any other bank in Europe. Why?
It is indeed. It's an absolute beast. And the story goes that when Dad went over to Hamburg in the late 50s to measure up their bank, the kind of guy he was like, my bank's going to be considerably bigger. And he says that he forgot that there was 2 foot of snow on top. So then got home. They sent poor Granny Sue, his second wife, up to measure it as he was standing there barking orders. But it still remains one of the biggest beasts, in the world today. And winning the Derby still is so important. And of course, this year, finally, 60th anniversary, my dear brother-in-law finally won it after 20 years of trying. So it was a great year this year.
And I did say at the very beginning, there's a picture on the screen at the moment for people who are listening to our conversation on radio. There's you, me and Nick Soames, and before that there was you, me and Claire Balding, and there's one of you, Mrs Stewart and Biggins. Please, and there's Martin Clunes, who's the president of the British Horse Society.
Exactly.
I give you 30 seconds. I give you 30 seconds uninterrupted to convince the people who are kind enough to watch us and listen to us that this is not a snobby elite sport. It's lovely, available to everybody and enjoyed by everybody.
Absolutely. And this year we've done even more to try and combat a little bit for everyone the cost of living crisis. So all advance tickets free for the family. We've got incredible family areas, and if you're a show jumping purist, we've got that side covered, but it's also a fabulous day out for the family. And as you were saying, we sell just as much beer as we do Pimm's, as we do champagne. You can buy new sofas, you can buy jewellery, there's a craft area, there's a chariot racing, and it's just a great British family day out. And we are really so excited to have it back up and running this year. And as I say, we have also the creme de la creme of elite world-class equestrianism happening too. So we are very excited.
I couldn't contradict one dot or comma of that. And if you haven't tried it, do it. And if it's your first time, Hickstead's a damn fine place to give it a go. Daisy, love to you and all the family. And Sally and I can't wait to see you in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you for finding time. I know you're busy bunny, but thanks for finding time to talk to you very soon.
You too.
The great Daisy Bunn there. Talking about Hickstead, one of my great passions. And if you haven't tried it, please do try it. You'll love it. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We've lots more coming up on the programme this afternoon, including Steve Nallon, the famous impressionist behind Margaret Thatcher's spitting image, will be right here, live in the studio. You will not want to miss it, nor him talking about his new book. All of that after the break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel, And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hi, it's Alastair Stewart, and we're into the last hour of my programme. We've lots more to come, which you will really enjoy. But let's bring you first right up to date at 1:01 with the news. Here's Tamsin.
Alistair, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1:01. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Drivers hoping to travel through the port of Dover are facing a second day of severe delays. The port authorities expressed relief at improved levels of French border staff, but warned there is a way to go to clear the backlog. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said the queues were unacceptable and called on officials to build up capacity at the border. A French politician claims the delays are a result of Brexit, as officials have to run more checks than before. But Dover MP Natalie Elphick says the queues are down to the French side.
The French didn't turn up to work as they were expected to do in the numbers that were needed, and that resulted in that traffic gridlock in Dover and that traffic chaos that we saw right across Kent. So the French were responsible for the mess yesterday. I understand that they are now manning the passport controls properly at Dover, which is good news, but it will take some time yet to clear through that traffic backlog.
Rishi Sunak says he would put the UK on a crisis footing to tackle issues such as inflation if he becomes Prime Minister. Speaking in Grantham, the former Chancellor hit back at tax cuts announced by his rival Liz Truss, warning they could lead to further inflation. He also promised to tackle the NHS backlog, pledging to eliminate one-year waiting times by September 2024.
I'm the candidate in this contest who can say unequivocally the NHS will be safe in my hands. We face the worst NHS winter crisis in decades. Tackling the backlogs is the biggest public service emergency.
Meanwhile, Liz Truss is promising to review all EU laws, calling for a red tape bonfire of all legislation retained after Brexit if she becomes Prime Minister. The Tory leadership hopeful said she would implement a review by the end of next year and scrap rules which were deemed to hinder UK growth. She argues that the measures would encourage business investment, but critics warn it could lead to a weakening of workers' rights. The body of a man has been found in Essex this morning after a 21-year-old went missing on the hottest day in British history last week. Emergency services had been looking for a man who was last seen in the water on Tuesday close to Clacton Pier. Police say formal identification of the body has not yet taken place, but efforts are being made to contact the man's family. Ukraine says Russian missiles have hit infrastructure in the city of Odessa just a day after a landmark deal was struck between the two sides to unblock grain exports. The agreement, brokered by the United Nations and Turkey, had raised hopes that an international food crisis stemming from the Russian invasion could be stopped. It follows months of Russia blockading Ukraine's ports in the Black Sea, causing a global shortage. A pizza delivery driver in the United States has been praised after rescuing 5 people from a burning home. Nick Bostick was driving in Lafayette in Indiana when he saw a burning house. He managed to help 4 people leave the building before going back in to rescue a 6-year-old girl. After finding the child, the pair had to jump from a first-floor window. Incredibly, they only sustained minor injuries. An 8-year-old boy has embarked on a 1,100-mile cycle across the UK to raise money for his favourite animal, the hedgehog. Harry Petzer and his father Nick are 4 days into their 30-day challenge, which started in Cornwall and will end in Scotland. Harry from Wokingham has raised over £1,800 so far for Tiggy Winkle's The Wildlife Hospital Trust. Good on you, Harry. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed. Right, back now to our top story in that all-important Conservative leadership race. I know you might not be a Conservative, but whoever wins will be your Prime Minister, whatever party persuasion you support. We're down to the final two. The membership of the Tory party in the country will soon be choosing. But the Tory party's rejected the chance for a genuine rethink, a fresh start, be it via Kemi Badenoch, Penny Mordaunt or Tom Tugendhat. Now, I'm delighted to be joined back in the studio by Joanne Nadler, who listened to our earlier conversations, and I'm going to ask her to reflect on what she's heard so far. But first, I want to add some more food to thought for you to give you the chance of a final say. And that food for thought comes from Conservative MP Justin Tomlinson. Justin is the Member of Parliament for North Swindon. Justin, we had a bit of a giggle when our mutual friend Tom Tugendhat fell out of the race. Your phone was buzzing while you were talking to Darren McCaffrey, and you said, but no one had ever been more popular. However, a big fail on the part of the other two candidates because none had offered you an ice lolly.
Well, actually,
I'm sending this to you in an ice box.
I'd vote for you. That was actually it was when Kemi was knocked out, because I was supporting the Kemi campaign, and literally within about 10 seconds of her not getting enough votes, I had so many messages on my phone with offers to meet, and over the following 24 hours, as one of those 59 floating voters, I proved very popular. But not one of them, despite the very hot weather, thought to offer an ice cream.
Well, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. I do apologise. I muddled up between Kemi, but we lost Kemi, we lost Tom, we lost Penny, and it's now down to the final two. Have either of them yet managed to persuade you that you... I mean, you've had your vote. You could tell us which of them you voted for the final two, but more importantly, whether you will wave a flag in your constituency in support of one or other of the candidates?
Well, I'm genuinely torn. Look, I was a supporter of the Prime Minister. I was there to the very end. And once we had a very crowded field to replace them, I chose Kemi. It's not somebody I knew personally, but I'd seen her firsthand in select committees at the dispatch box. And I thought she just had that extra bit of magic. She could engage across the political spectrum. She answered questions. She was straight talking. And you would know as a journalist, having people who will answer questions makes for better viewing. And I just thought it's very difficult to follow the current Prime Minister. He's a one-off. And I thought Kemi gave us that opportunity to renew as a party head of a fifth term. Now, Kemi went beyond all expectations. People didn't think she'd get nominated. They thought she'd be out in the first or the second round. She beat former chancellors, senior, well-established candidates, and we're, incredibly proud that she came forth, and she is definitely one for the future. Then I was chased by all three colleagues, good colleagues. All three would make a good Prime Minister. We're now down to the final two, but I was probably last to vote on Wednesday. My pen was over that ballot paper for 5 minutes. It was a really difficult decision. But I'm now just, same as any other member, there's about 200,000 of us have now got to make that decision the next 6 weeks. And I'm, going to have to think long and hard. They've both got strengths, but at the moment, they both need to do more.
I didn't interrupt for a moment there because I'm intrigued in that analysis of what was going on in your head and how you got to that point. And I respect the fact that you clearly haven't yet decided, and let's just underline that point. But I'm intrigued also to know whether you're picking that up as well amongst your constituents within your local party association, because you said at the very top of it that you were a Boris Johnson supporter, you wished it hadn't happened, it has happened. And you've got the Christopher Hope, reports in the Telegraph about a write-in campaign, thousands of people saying it should be Boris should have a chance, and him leaving the thought out there that he might be back, hasta la vista, baby. Does the party in the country feel really angry about this?
I think it's very mixed. I've done a survey to local residents. I was at the football last night. People do come and tell me at pitch side exactly what they're thinking. I think there's a lot of frustration that the PM got himself into that position. And, you know, I desperately wish he could have carried on. I voted for him in the vote of confidence, but he did lose the confidence of the majority of the party. I was in a minority, and I'm afraid that's where we are. We now have to move on. I very much hope that the PM can still be a major part of the party going forward. He is one of our best performers. He is our best performer, let's be frank. And I hope that come the next general election, he is still part of our team, trying to make sure we can engage across the public, the political spectrum, because he's got that ability. And that was what I was referring to around the two finalists. They're both good, they're both experienced, they both held top roles in government and have done well. There's no doubting that. I think Rishi's more comfortable in the sort of hustings and the media performances. Liz is the longest standing cabinet member and has done well in every role that she's had. So both have something to offer, but they need to find an extra gear, because to win an unprecedented fifth term, we have got to be forward thinking. And they've got to find a way to unite the party, because one of the biggest challenges is now whoever wins, every MP will be hoping for that telephone call to be given a ministerial position. Less than a third will get a ministerial position, and even some of those who do won't necessarily get the one that they will want. So, and that combined with the immediate challenges around cost of living, inflation, difficult decisions will have to be taken. And that in part was why I was so keen to support the Prime Minister, who wasn't flawless, but we had a vote of confidence that should have given him 12 months. So how do you hold a party together that can quickly change its mind if things start to go in the wrong direction?
Final point, I'm going to bring Joanne in to reflect on some of the genuine intriguing things that you've just been saying there. But I was thinking overnight, knowing that we were going to have this conversation again, because we've already spoken once before and we occasionally exchange messages and stuff. Don't take a word of this wrong, and let me finish it before commenting. You're essentially a working class lad made good. Your dad died when you were pretty young. You ended up in, by your own account, a pretty rubbishy comprehensive school, but nevertheless went on to a good university. It was the other Oxford, but it was a good university. So in a sense, it's a triumph. Do you, hand on heart, still think that today's Conservative Party speaks for you?
Yeah, I do. I genuinely do. And I'm from a mixed family. I've got a brother who votes Labour, a brother who votes SNP, a brother who doesn't really vote, and a sister who I think is a Tory Lib Dem waverer. So we're a very mixed family. And I was attracted to the Conservative Party because of social mobility. I went to Oxford Brookes, not Oxford University, but I was always a hard worker. I didn't study politics, but I made it to number 2 in the DWP, and I was deputy chairman of the party. And I do think, no one party has a monopoly on getting all things right, and we all have good times and bad times, and it goes around in cycles. But the Conservatives, at the very core, are around opportunity for all. If you work hard, you play by the rules, and the state, can provide good healthcare and a good education, then everybody and anyone can fulfil their potential, and we can all play a part in a constructive, positive society. So that's what attracted me to the Conservative Party, but I've never believed politics is black and white. And that's what I want to now see from both Rishi and Liz, is that extra level of engagement and enthusiasm to give tangible reasons for non-natural Conservative voters to vote for us. We got them in 2019. Labour got them all in 97. So you get your leader right, you get your campaigns right, you can earn that chance to win. I'm not interested in either of them saying the other one isn't good. They have to earn my vote, and they have to earn the votes of the other 200,000. It is wide open. Either of them could be Prime Minister, and I want one of them to shine, because if they do, they'll win and they can unite the party.
Justin, the next voice you'll hear will be Joanne Nadler, and then I'm going to come back to you for a final thought. We've got about 3.5-4 minutes left, so if you can spare the time, stay exactly where you are, go and have a nice lolly, and then come back and join the hot seat again. I thought that was absolutely intriguing. As he said himself, someone who's held pretty high office within the government, at Minister of State level, number 2 to Therese Coffey in the Department of Work and Pensions. His mind is wide open. He wants to be a Tory. He wanted that rethink reflection period that you talked about as well. And he's a waverer, not just in how he votes, but like you, I'm looking at the Conservative Party, I think I'm still there, but extraordinary contribution.
Yeah, I mean, it was very candid.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, very interesting, because I agree with a great deal of what Justin had to say. And I think his motivation for supporting Kemi early on, this idea that you needed someone who could articulate the connection between the Conservative Party and a true meritocratic sort of system. I also totally agree with him that the two candidates have got to now avoid knocking pieces out of each other and have just got to come forward with a positive agenda for the country. I think, and I also agree with him that, you know, my mind is not at all made up between these two. I'm intrigued very much that Rishi Sunak is playing his campaign so safe. I might have expected him to have promoted more of a sort of reforming agenda, which we've not heard from. He does seem to be presenting himself, albeit he hasn't been charged with this in quite the same way as Liz Truss is being accused of being continuity Boris. I mean, it's very difficult at the moment to see, for instance, what kind of government would Rishi Sunak lead if he were elected? Who would be in his inner team? Who would be in his cabinet? I rather feel if he doesn't get elected, he may leave politics altogether. Yeah. It's difficult to see him. Can I just put one final thought, and then because I did promise, and we both want to hear his reflection on what you've said by way of reflection on what he said. But I noticed this morning, interestingly, that whilst the tax debate still rages and Rishi is in Grantham, where Margaret Thatcher was born and bred and brought up, above the grocer's shop, that Rishi has made a big thing about the crisis in the health service today, about immigration. He's beginning to broaden the agenda out slightly more than Liz. Well, he has to. They both have to. He's working to quite a well-orchestrated grid, as I understand it. So we can expect to hear him addressing other issues. I don't think either of them have necessarily benefited from the debate being so focused on tax. I think this is a very reflexive thing for Conservatives. They love to talk about tax and cutting tax. But, you know, it's crucial at the moment because we are facing huge strains on the cost of living, without doubt. But there is so much else that we need to hear from these candidates.
All right, let me bring Justin Tomlinson back in again for that final thought. And thank you for staying there. Yes, you did. That's good news. If I'd cut to a lovely picture behind you, but not you, it would have been heartbreaking. You're in candid mood, lots of candour, which we both respect and admire. Do you agree with Joanne that as you and other people within your party make your mind up between these two people, that it may just be that Rishi's got a little bit more to do to persuade folk like you and like the members of your local association that he is the right man for the job, because all the polls suggest amongst Conservatives that at the moment Liz is running away with it?
Yeah, that's what my surveys are showing at the moment. And I thought the reflection there was absolutely spot on. Look, I had to resign my role as the deputy chairman of the party to support Kemi. You can't be connected to central office and remain neutral. So I was the only Boris loyalist who ended up jobless after that long week. And that's the sort of thing and I was happy to do that. That was my choice only. And I want to be inspired and fired up by the other two. Look, my role as the deputy chairman was supporting our 80-20 candidates, our most marginal ones, the ones who had won seats for the first time in generations or for the first time ever. If we haven't got a leader who can appeal across the political spectrum, many, many good colleagues will face defeat at the next election. We have got to want to rally round and support them. And they're absolutely spot on. They've got to broaden their appeal. We know what they stand for on the economy, on taxes. They've both got their strengths around there. But what is their government? What is their USP? What is going to excite the voters so they will put their trust back into us to give us that unprecedented fifth term? We've all got to be very candid about this. This is a big challenge for the party. These have been difficult times. We've done a lot of damage to our reputation. We've now got to find a way through this. They've both got the potential. They've just got to show that hunger and that ability to connect.
Justin Tomlinson, a genuine pleasure. Thank you very much for so much of your time. I hope you managed to have a peaceful rest of your weekend, although I doubt it, because those phones will be going bonkers again. But great to talk to you. Do keep in touch with us. And Joanne Nadler, my dear friend here, listening to that and commenting upon what he had to say. Thank you so much. And you too are always welcome back on the programme anytime. Look forward to it very much indeed. We asked you to join in our conversation as well, which you have done. And George, do I start with George? I think I do, yes. George clearly isn't a fan of either Truss or Sunak and writes in to say, who should be our new Prime Minister? Nigel Farage. Then we really will leave the EU. Thank you, George. It's pretty clear who Kenneth isn't backing. He says, Sunak the backstabber is the reason that we are in this mess. And Mac, finally, I think I've got time for, says, Boris won the last election and he should have stayed as leader until the end of the parliamentary session, or at least until people that elected him decided he should go, not the MPs. Thank you very much indeed. Keep those views coming in. And, of course, do subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can catch up on any of the interviews that you missed or watch the ones you really enjoyed. Again, we are at GB News. Now, political history is littered with great and grey characters. The more colourful and the more idiosyncratic, the happier the characteristics and caricaturists, that should be, and impersonators are. Some, like my friend Rory Bremner, are also political satirists, but the art of capturing those idiosyncrasies is a joy to behold, and few, if anyone, ever did it or has ever done it better or more memorably than my next guest. He did many characters, but his most celebrated was his Margaret Thatcher, for among many outlets, but particularly the original spitting image. If you need it, here's a reminder. No?
He's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good...
Wake up, you blithering idiot! You've made another balls up in Europe!
And Jeffrey's made a balls.
You know, spitting image portraying me as someone who is out of touch, someone who has no humanity.
And sitting next to me, chortling quietly with pride or reflection, I don't know, is the great Steve Nallum. I mean, the one thing that's always struck me as being curious is that she was a fabrication. She was a creation. You know,
she was. But she was a creation. What I did was create a version of her, you know. And it's interesting, the two clips, the first one was very early, the second one was later. So very early, she had a much higher voice and spoke much more clearly like that. And, of course, that's the way she was brought up, in a way to speak. But as the years went on, goodness me, Mr. Stewart, she brought that voice down. But the problem was that it spoke a little bit too slowly for the puppet. And Peter and Roger, who made the puppet, said to me, could you make it sound more like the puppet looks? So I said, well, how do I do that? I thought, I don't know how to do that. So I borrowed her voice from the House of Commons. Yeah. The right honourable gentleman doesn't understand the nature of fiscal policy, nor does he understand foreign policy. And that's what you had in that Geoffrey Howe little sketch we've had now, because she didn't speak like that in Cabinet, but we knew her voice from the House of Commons. Yeah. And they, you know, so in a way, spitting image required you to be a caricaturist with characteristics.
The other thing I find intriguing is that you mentioned Roger and the other, the guys
Peter
who
and
wrote
Roger,
the stuff, and there was a phenomenal team of people like you doing the voices, but writing the hard stuff. But unlike people like Rory, who I admire and love and have done for years and years, I mean, when he does the satire bit, it's in the content. He spells it out. You used a form of satire, which was the way she would beat up Michael Heseltine with the tone of the voice, or belittle somebody in the Labour Party with the look. That was an extraordinary form of satire, which was all in your larynx.
Well, the larynx is a very inventive little part of the body, actually. You know what I mean? But the thing with political caricatures is, and any voice actually, you've got to get the technical stuff right, the phrasing and all that sort of stuff. You've then got to get the psychology right. I mean, in a way, the attitude of the character, the psychology of the character, is far more important than actually what they sound like.
Yeah. I mean, otherwise it's just a silly puppet show.
Otherwise it's just a silly. You've got to get that. You've got to get that attitude in, it's not always easy to do. The very first Prime Minister I ever did was, you'll remember, was Harold Wilson back in the early days, and it was no good just doing the voice of Harold Wilson. You had to get that condescension look that he had when he interviewed you, and the blinks that he did when he got rather nervous. And what you tried to put in was the condescension, because that's the way he operated. What was interesting about Blair, for example, when Blair began, he was just please like me. I want you to like me. Please like me. I'm the Prime Minister. Please like me. And that was really important. But by the end, his attitude changed, and the way he used to do interviews at the end was, what I'm saying is obvious. Why aren't you understanding it? Is that because you're stupid? Because the attitude had completely changed.
I've never thought of that. Fascinating contrast between Margaret and Tony.
You see, what you've got now with Rishi Sunak is that he's Tony Blair Mark I. He wants you to like him. He hasn't...
But Liz would have us believe that she's Margaret Thatcher Mark II.
Well, my wig was better, but that's another, that's another matter.
But she wore the big bow on
She wore the big bow, and everybody picked up on it.
And she's been in a tank.
And she's been in the tank
Duncan
and all the rest of it. But she's not Margaret Thatcher, you know. She's a different... to me, I haven't started trying to do it. I'd have to lose a lot of weight and you know, all that sort of stuff. I like red wine too much nowadays to start losing my body weight to look like her. But she's got a slight Anne Robinson way of looking at you. She keeps her face very still, and it's all coming through that nose of hers, which is slightly hooked. So I think if you want to do Liz Truss, do Anne Robinson with a bit of Alan Bennett put in, because, you know, she come from Leeds. Bit of Roundy Park. She's been on about Roundy Park, hasn't she? Which is the poshest part of Leeds, incidentally. She's an odd I listened to her, and she was born in Oxford, she went to Leeds, then she went to Scotland, and then to Canada.
Also the fantastic transformation of, you know, brought up in a fairly progressive right-on family, Liberal Democrat, what have you. I'm going to draw the line there only because time is slightly against us, and I genuinely want to talk about this. Can I just hold it up here? There we are. If we can do that on that camera there. This is Steve's book, The Time That Never Was. And what I find fascinating about it is it's not overtly a political work, but it's about a group of people, and one of them is a superstar, who can avert crises happening. Now, it could just be that crisis is what we've been talking to my political friends about for the Conservative Party. It could be the next general election. But one step back, where did the idea for the book come from?
Well, the idea that they can anticipate slight accidents ahead. So, in a way... Swidgers. And I've stolen that from Charles Dickens. They sort of sway and switch and nudge your time path out the way. So you've got... So actually, based on what happened to me, quick story, I came home one day, chatted to one of my neighbours on the way down the road, arrived at the house, a slate fell right in front of me, and the roofer said, well, had you been underneath that, 20 seconds, you know, later, whatever, you wouldn't be here. And I thought, my neighbour gave me those 20 seconds, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if there were sort of cosmic creatures that were trying to stop those sort of accidents ahead? So that's the general thing about it. But the big political thing isn't really a political thing. It's my belief in life, and I've got no politics, I've got no ideology. What I do believe it's the smallest good can put right the greatest harm.
And the accidental kindness can sometimes be
absolutely,
profound.
It's the small miracles that people do every day, and it's the smallness of it that to me is most impressive. And over COVID, we found that. You know, that people have been you know, our street has all been, we've got a WhatsApp group and all that, and it's those small things that people can make the big difference. So that's the big theme of the book.
We have to move on. Heartbroken though I am by that, because my big boss in my ear is saying, I could listen to this all day, but you can't. But I will. I'll ask you to do two things, and that is go home and still work on those two voices, and when we finally have a decision back in September, come in and give us your Rishi Sunak or your Liz Truss. And secondly, in all seriousness, I wish you every success with this, whether it's read by adults or by kids. It's beautifully written, and it's a really clever idea. So for both of those things, Steve, a total joy to see you, and thank you very much for coming in and joining us.
A great pleasure, thank you.
See you soon. September at the latest. The great Steve Nallon there. Plenty more still to come this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends. After the break, Rishi Sunak said this morning one of the first things that he would do as Prime Minister is prioritise sorting out the NHS. But long NHS waiting times appear to be pushing people into paying thousands of pounds for private treatment, even without insurance. So, what will he do about that? We'll be speaking to the former Chief Medical Officer of Bupa after this break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and good afternoon. It's 1:33. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Drivers hoping to travel through the port of Dover are facing a second day of severe delays. The port authorities expressed relief at improved levels of French border staff, but warned there is a way to go to clear the backlog. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said the queues were unacceptable and called on officials to build up capacity at the border. A French politician claims the delays are a result of Brexit, as officials have to run more checks than before. Rishi Sunak says he would put the UK on a crisis footing to tackle issues such as inflation if he becomes Prime Minister. Speaking in Grantham, the former Chancellor hit back at tax cuts announced by his rival Liz Truss, warning they could lead to further inflation. He also promised to tackle the NHS backlog, pledging to eliminate one-year waiting times by September 2024. Meanwhile, Liz Truss is promising to review all EU laws, calling for a red tape bonfire of all legislation retained after Brexit if she becomes Prime Minister. The Tory leadership hopeful said she would implement a review by the end of next year and scrap rules which were deemed to hinder UK growth. She argues that the measures would encourage business investment, but critics warn it could lead to a weakening of workers' rights. Ukraine says Russian missiles have hit infrastructure in the city of Odessa just a day after a landmark deal was struck between the two sides to unblock grain exports. The agreement, brokered by the United Nations and Turkey, had raised hopes that an international food crisis stemming from the Russian invasion could be stopped. It follows months of Russia blockading Ukraine's ports in the Black Sea, causing a global shortage. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Hello and welcome back to me. Tamsin, thank you very much indeed. It is 25 minutes to 2 and you're here with me, Alastair Stewart and friends on GB News TV and radio. Now, NHS waiting times are forcing more and more patients to pay for private operations. There were apparently 69,000 self-funded treatments, not insurance, self-funded, in the United Kingdom in the final 3 months of last year, and that is a 39% rise on the same period before the pandemic. Now, that genuinely shocked me when I read it yesterday, so I immediately asked the team to invite my good friend, Dr. Andrew Vallance-Owen, on the programme once again. He's been here many times and he is always most welcome, and there he is now. Andrew was the former Chief Medical Officer of Bupa, fully qualified doctor, medical his life, school governor, all the rest of it. Andrew, great for you to fit us into what I know is a busy weekend. But first things first, waiting lists, of course, are not new. You famously were at the heart of the deal with Labour's Alan Milburn to work to get those lists done by bringing together the NHS and the private sector. Is that route now exhausted?
I don't think it's exhausted. No, I don't think it is. I think the concordat that followed and many private hospitals are now still working with the NHS and have contracts to help the NHS out. As, of course, they did last year during the main COVID part of the crisis. Pretty well private practice stopped almost completely and private hospitals took on NHS patients. So there's quite a lot of that still going on. But of course, they are now under pressure, as you just said yourself, from demand from self-pay patients wanting to come in.
If Sunak were to lift the phone and talk to you and say, look, I've made it one of my 3 absolute priorities this very morning all over the newspapers, not just the economy, but the NHS and immigration, and he knew your background, knew what you were capable of, what would you tell him to do?
It's a huge challenge. I mean, you may have seen the editors of the British Medical Journal and the Health Service Journal, 2 very professional, 2 of the top editors in the business, said last week the NHS is not living with COVID, it's dying from it. And the problem we've got is these relentless peaks of COVID. We've got amongst the highest levels at the moment now. That means staff sickness. It means pressure in so many different ways, burnout. We're seeing doctors leaving the NHS. As you may have seen in the private healthcare network announcements yesterday, the number of consultants is actually dropping by 12% because, people are leaving the NHS. So there's a huge number of things to tackle. But I would also say that if they don't get the social care, the health and care levy, that's going to be a further problem in the short term. But I don't want to get into politics, obviously.
No, but and I don't expect you to, but it's worth noting because that is at the heart of Liz Truss's, as it were, manifesto. But I want to end. We've got about a minute left, Andrew, and as I stressed, you are a medic in your own right. The fact that you worked with the private sector for a while at a very, very senior level, just park that for a moment. I am deeply worried about folk out there who cannot afford it, who are dipping into their pension pots, if they're lucky enough to have it, going to the bank and borrowing money to pay for an operation that the NHS cannot do. Am I right? Forget insurance for a moment, but this is just personal responsibility and personal risk.
Yeah, I mean, it's devastating for people to have to do this. And, people are collecting money, they're saving money to send grandma or the wife or whoever it is to have their hip replacement. People are waiting in pain with increasing disability. It has to be sorted out. But I just want to say again, the NHS is under huge pressure. Although the number of people in the community are now working and living with COVID, the hospitals are not, because they are having the highest levels of inpatient hospitalizations again, which is putting huge pressure on the service and yet further holding back these waiting times. So it's a terrible position to find yourself in. In a way, we're lucky we have a a parallel system, but it is, as you say, only really the wealthy and people who can collect together and crowdfund who can save up enough money to go to the private sector.
What a state we've come to. Andrew, it's always a pleasure, so informative as well as pleasurable. Keep in touch and we'll talk again soon, I hope. Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Andrew Vallance-Owen, who I have known since university days. We were both at Bristol together, and he went on to be the former chief. He went on to be the medical officer at Bupa and now is doing other things. But words of wisdom there to reflect on. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends like Andrew, and we've plenty more still to come this afternoon, including last weekend on the programme we dedicated time to hear from the Grassroots Conservative Association. So as the race narrows down to the two chosen by the MPs, Rishi and Liz, we want to know how they're feeling again this weekend, and that comes up after this break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. It is 18 minutes. Yes, it is 18 minutes or so, 22. Let's call it 22. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News. We've been speaking in depth today about that all-important Conservative leadership race as it now narrows down to the final two. Two of which were at the top of Boris Johnson's government. So the race now heads for the members, and due to the great feedback last weekend that we got for focusing on what grassroots organisations within the Conservative Party think, we wanted to bring it back again this weekend, but with a twist. So joining me now is Matthew Robinson. Matthew is the chair of the Northern Ireland Conservatives. And first of all, to make it clear, you, of course, as members of the Conservative Party, have a vote, although your party doesn't contest seats in Northern Ireland.
Well, we actually do contest seats in Northern Ireland, and I stood as our party's candidate in the Assembly elections this past May in the North Down constituency, and previously in the 2019 general election, I stood in the same constituency. So we do contest elections in Northern Ireland, maybe without the same. We probably don't contest as many seats as you would expect to in GB, but we still contest seats. But this leadership election has given our membership a really exciting opportunity to really, stamp their say on who they want to not just shape our party going forward, but shape our country. And I mean, we're incredibly proud that we're the only mainstream political party in the UK that contests elections in all four corners of the United Kingdom. The Labour Party actually prohibit their members from standing as candidates in Northern Ireland. So we're incredibly proud as the Conservative and Unionist Party that we do stand in Northern Ireland and that we contest elections to the best of our ability.
I'm a great believer in apologising when you get something wrong, and I got that wrong. And I profoundly apologetic, not least to you, given that you were a candidate both in the parliamentary election and in the Assembly election. The other thing, before I come to a little bit more detail of what you just said there about the excitement within your association's membership about being able to take a part in this, the newspapers are obviously full this morning as well of the European Union filing basically 4 lawsuits against the United Kingdom over the Northern Ireland Protocol and the terms of Brexit. What's the reaction on the ground to that?
Ultimately, I think we got to a landing zone on the protocol as a whole that it just did not enjoy cross-community support in Northern Ireland. And that's the whole ballgame with the Good Friday Agreement. It just got to the stage that political unionism could not support certain strands of the protocol bill. I guess there was always going to be a risk if the UK government legislated on their own side that there could be some sort of retaliation from the European Commission. We've seen maybe the beginnings of that today. I don't think Brussels has any appetite for a trade war with the UK, after the COVID pandemic, with the war in Ukraine as it currently stands. But I mean, the UK government has always been open to negotiations with Brussels. I guess the frustration was they got to a point where the EU wasn't being reasonable. I think the UK pitched quite a sensible sort of green lane proposal whereby goods coming from GB to Northern Ireland that were clearly for domestic consumption in Northern Ireland would not be subject to checks. And those goods onwards to the Republic of Ireland would, of course, be subject to the relevant checks. I think those were quite sensible proposals. And I think if we could get to a landing spot on that, I think Northern Ireland could be incredibly well placed going forward to try and, take some of the potential benefits out of the economic, with access to both markets, but at the same time making sure that both the unionist community and the nationalist community are in a good space on the protocol.
And that plan you described, put into legislation in recent days, has Liz Truss's personal fingerprints all over it. Although she was Foreign Secretary at the time, she was Boris Johnson's point person, as it were, on Northern Ireland. Is that swaying people like you and the members of your association in her direction? Or is Truss, or is Rishi Sunak's stuff on the economy, hold hard, we'll do the right thing when the time is right, swaying them? Which way do you sense your members are going?
Well, I mean, ultimately, as chairman of Northern Ireland, I'll come to my own conclusion on it, but it's up to our members, to make their own determination. I would say I definitely think we have some of our members leaning towards Liz Truss for those reasons that she took a sort of a centre stage role as it relates to the protocol bill. At the same time, though, I'd say I don't really see much difference between either Sunak or Truss on the protocol bill. I think all their public statements suggest that they're broadly supportive of the legislation going through Parliament. I think that's a good thing. If in the next administration, whoever would be Prime Minister, whether that's Truss or Sunak, if the EU came back in good faith with sort of a renewed enthusiasm to meet the UK government halfway, I'm sure a future Prime Minister would look at that. But that's not where we are right now. No. And I think both Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak are fully behind the protocol bill.
Let's do a deal publicly. Come back after you've had your August 17th debate in Northern Ireland, in Belfast, between the two candidates. Tell me what you think then, and that will also give me a chance to get the lead in right to you, to describe you, Matthew Robinson, as a person who has fought in the Conservative colours, both parliamentary and Assembly elections. Meantime, look forward to seeing you then on the weekend after the 17th. For the time being, thank you very much indeed, and I wish you and your friends a lovely weekend. Great to see you. Thank you. Matthew Robinson there, the chair of the Northern Ireland Conservatives. I want to round up all of today's conversations and reflections with James Sunderland MP. James is the Conservative Member of Parliament for Bracknell and was a Penny Mordaunt supporter. How big a miss, in your view, was it that there wasn't one of the outsiders, whether it was Penny, Tom or Kemi, and we had Justin Tomlinson on just a moment ago saying he had wished that we'd had at least the debate around Kemi versus the other. How big a miss for the Conservative Party was that to not have one of them on the final ballot paper?
Well, hi, Alistair. That's the $1 million question. I mean, personally, I'm very keen that I don't come across as sour grapes, but what's important for me is that the membership has a choice. They've got a choice right now between two very good candidates. Of course, I would have wanted to see Penny Mordaunt in the final. I would also have wanted the membership to have had a choice on Penny Mordaunt, because I think that she was an excellent candidate, is an excellent candidate, and will be a fine Prime Minister if she ever gets the chance.
I'm intrigued to know why you didn't get, given you wanted an outsider. I'm assuming, therefore, that is a personal assessment of the merits and arguments of Penny Mordaunt, and she's been good enough to express them on this programme a couple of times. I know her quite well, and I agree with a lot of what you just said. But I'm also slightly intrigued, given your background, why you didn't go for Tom, because Tom was also an outsider, but like you, has a military background.
I know Tom really well. He's a good friend. I think, if I'm being entirely objective, I think it's his lack of ministerial experience, which I think led me away from him. But he would be another very fine Prime Minister if he ever gets the chance, and I'll be happy to support him. I think, to answer your question, Alistair, directly, Penny for me was the exciting, fresh candidate. Her ideas resonated with me. She phoned me about 2 weeks ago now on a Saturday morning and said, would you please join my campaign team? I asked her two questions. Firstly, do you have a plan? Yes, she said, I do have a plan. And secondly, will your campaign be fought cleanly, with integrity, without baggage? Yes, she said, and she was true to both of those to the last. And as I said, disappointing it's not longer through, but we've got to get behind the two candidates now to ensure that we get the right Prime Minister.
And on that point, how do you assess the economic pitches, which is where we started the conversation with Joanne Nadler, who you know is a Conservative, although she's wavering slightly at the moment, but has worked in the upper reaches of government for John Major and folk like that, and Trevor Kavanagh and others. This choice between Rishi Sunak, who I think is slightly more in the Thatcher position of defeat inflation, then cut the taxes, versus Liz, cut the taxes now, get on with it, because folk out there are really hurting from the cost of living crisis. Does either of those positions tempt you?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because they both offer merits. And if I'm being brutally frank, there are inconsistencies in policy areas of both of them. I mean, Rishi Sunak voted to leave the European Union. Liz Truss voted to remain, but she's now seen as being the Brexiteer, the firm Brexiteer candidate, and certainly the candidate around which most of the Brexiteers are aligning, the ERG, for example. I think personally that pragmatism is what matters right now. You can't promise lots of tax cuts. I think Liz is probably well advised on this, and that her view is that if you lower tax, then you'll increase growth. You'll incentivise entrepreneurship and increase growth. And we've seen many times in the past where lowering corporation tax in particular has led to that increase in revenue. But by the same token, we have got to fight inflation. So my concern with Liz's policies would be that they could be inflationary. So at this point in time, the jury's out. And I would urge people watching your show just to listen to what the candidates are saying, and those who can vote accordingly.
Very sage advice indeed, and I appreciate it. They've also got to broaden the agenda out. That was something that Joanne Nadler said earlier on in the programme. And her book, which you may or may not know, is Too Nice to Be a Tory. She comes from a wing of the party that I suspect you would be quite comfortable in, because you've written about the need right now to be exploring issues such as education more generally, special needs within education, homelessness, something that I have a passion for as well. Haven't heard a word substantially on any of those sorts of subjects yet.
Yeah, it's a very fair point. I mean, interestingly enough, special needs education and homelessness are issues that are very important to me personally. And of course, the panoply of policies extends far beyond the economy. But at this point in time, with the cost of living crisis so acute, it is right, I think, that the candidates focus on economic policy. And the other point I make as well, of course, is that both of the candidates will reserve the right to continue with those policies in Boris Johnson's government that have been pretty successful. And we are investing more in special needs education. During the pandemic, we did an awful lot to eradicate homelessness. There's more we can do, I think, in terms of our socially aware policies. But ultimately, everything costs money. The country's £2.2 trillion in the red at the moment, and therefore it is right, in my view, that the election will be won and lost on economic issues.
Yeah. The final point is this, that Justin said that he sensed amongst his association ordinary members of the Conservative Party, big power as far as you guys are concerned, clearly, but there was still a lingering anger about what happened to Boris Johnson, whether it was Rishi as the assassin or Liz staying loyal for too long, other candidates whipping up their own campaigns in the back rooms. Can the party move on from that, or will that anger linger amongst ordinary members of the Conservative Party when they come to make those marks on the ballot paper?
Alistair, it's a very fair question. I mean, MPs are damned if they do and damned if they don't. And look at my inbox and my correspondence over the last 12 months. I mean, I've had vitriol from those who don't like Boris Johnson and think he should not be in government. I've had vitriol since he left from those who support Boris Johnson and think he should still be there. So you can't win. What I would say is two things. Firstly, I think it's right that Boris Johnson resigned. You can't keep giving oxygen to the opposition and the media. And I think that... we'd run out of road in terms of moral authority. That was my personal view. And I think the second thing is that people have to make the decision themselves now in terms of how they vote. We are where we are. We've moved on from Boris Johnson. We have two candidates that aren't Boris Johnson. Therefore, we need to unite behind either of them and make this work. And that's what we're going to do.
Goodness gracious me. So thoughtful there. And I really am grateful to you and Justin before you, James Sunderland there. I hope very much you'll keep in touch. You are always welcome on this programme. We've had two great MPs today who've spoken from the heart, openly, honestly and devoid of spin. God, I love that. Thank you very much indeed. Keep in touch. That, alas, is all we have time for today. Ran out of time on the emails. I'll pick a few and bang them out tomorrow. Forgive me for that. But for now, remember, we are back at noon tomorrow. Before that, however, have a lovely afternoon. And here's the weather that you can anticipate whatever you're doing.
Head to this afternoon, and the UK is looking rather cloudy with outbreaks of rain across the north and the west. Let's take a look at the details. Northern parts of Scotland will be mostly dry this afternoon with some bright or sunny spells. Temperatures reaching around 19 degrees, turning increasingly cloudy though with rain arriving later. Northern Ireland will see rather cloudy conditions with patchy rain, though this shouldn't be too heavy. Feeling humid with temperatures of 22 degrees, but turning breezy. Mostly cloudy this afternoon across northern England with some patchy light rain in places, turning increasingly breezy, especially towards the coast. Top temperature 21 degrees. Rather cloudy skies across North Wales throughout the afternoon with the risk of some rain passing through. A gusty southerly wind will also develop. Temperatures will hover around 19 or 20 Celsius. There'll be some sunny spells from time to time across the East Midlands this afternoon, though perhaps the odd light shower is possible. Feeling pleasant in the sunshine, highs of 26 Celsius. Dry and bright across East Anglia this afternoon with plenty of sunny spells. Feeling pleasant in the sunshine. Temperatures reaching 25 Celsius, but it will be cooler towards the coast. Mostly dry this afternoon across southern England with some bright or sunny spells developing from time to time. Further outbreaks of rain in the north and west this evening, drier weather holding on in the east. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's